So, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's workshop session, which is all about an insight into medical school. We're going to be learning more about what life at medical school is like, what academics are like, but also what your social life is like, what extracurriculars look like, and so on. So, we hope that this session is useful and you learn something from it. So, a little bit about us: we are the Aspiring Medics, and we are an organization made up entirely of medical students who have very recently gone through the application process, so we can give you personalized advice based on challenges that we face, that you will probably face as well, and tips and tricks that worked for us that will work for you guys as well. So we offer a whole host of absolutely free resources to help you get into medical school, these weekly workshops being one of them. You can join every Saturday, or the recording goes up on Wednesdays on our YouTube channel. We have a whole range of other YouTube videos. We have free UCAT guides, personal statement guides, and application guides as well. And again, we have other affordable services such as our personal statement review and our interview pack. So a quick introduction about me. I am Arisma. I am an international medical student studying at King's College London, and I've just completed my first year and I'm moving into my second year. So here are just some of the benefits of joining our workshops. We have interactive Q&As, discount codes, insider information in terms of tips and tricks for your application, progress checklists, and of course, all of this is community driven. So here are the objectives for today's session. We're first going to understand how university is different from sixth form if you did A levels or studied in the UK, but just high school if you studied anywhere else. We're then going to know and develop the skills needed to thrive in university. Now, skill development is something that takes a lot of time, but we will give you tips on how you can develop these skills before you join university and why they're important in university in the first place. We're then going to quickly recap work experience and reflecting on it. And we're then going to just know more about a day or week in the life of current medical students, that medical student being me. I'm just quickly going to take you through what my week looks like. So if you could now just rate your confidence in your insight into medical school, a bit of a vague term, but do you think if you were to join medical school today, would you be prepared and would you feel comfortable essentially on a scale of 1 to 5? Okay, so we have an average of 3, which isn't too bad. But hopefully this clears up any misconceptions that you may have and gives you more realistic insights into medical school. And let's just quickly move on to our first objective, and that is understanding how university is different from sixth form. So what are your thoughts? We'd like to hear from you guys first. So you're more independent. Definitely, independence is a huge thing, which is good in many ways, but also you don't have someone kind of nagging you to finish your lectures, finish your homework, all of that stuff. You need a lot of self-motivation when you get independence. More active and proactive learning, more responsibilities, definitely, because it's not just academics that you're focused on, but also just living life. So cooking, cleaning, laundry, and also socializing. That's a huge aspect of, your university life in your early 20s. It's also a more career-focused journey. Definitely, you're studying very specific subjects and very few subjects, unlike high school, and in much more depth. And again, yes, you can choose if you want to attend lectures because there's no one nagging you to do that. And a lot of people don't always attend every single lecture because they find that maybe reading another resource might be useful. So that's perfectly fine as well. Just choose something that works out for you, which is obviously something that you will figure out once you get into university, a system of learning that works for you. So here are just some differences that I could think of. So in sixth form or school, you have a lot of teacher-guided learning where the teacher sets out the objectives for the session, takes you through the content, answers any questions, whereas in university, it's a lot of student-guided learning. So you will have lectures, but in some cases, especially anatomy, you would be required to go out of your way, learn some other things. And again, there's lots of self-motivation that's required. In sixth form, you study multiple subjects, whereas in university, you study just one subject, basically, or just related subjects in much more detail. In sixth form, you have a very structured and organized timetable, whereas in university, there's no real timetable. So my timetable every week varied. Some weeks I would have up to 7 hours of lectures a day, whereas some weeks I would have 1 or 2 hours of lectures a day. So it really just varies. And but keep in mind that these timetables, again, that they give out to you aren't hard, and they aren't like a hard and fast rule, so you can just change it however you like, and whatever suits you, especially if you're working or you have other commitments. They completely understand that, which is why your timetable is so flexible. In sixth form, the content covered in class is usually enough for the exam, and in university, students often have to research independently to learn content not covered in lectures. In sixth form, exams are usually predictable and you have a range of past papers, which can help you predict at least the type of questions that are coming. Whereas in university, exams may be tougher and finding official past papers is rare. You might find something through seniors and contacts you have at that school. But if you don't know someone, then it could be pretty hard to find past papers, as I think a lot of us have experienced in medical school. And again, another huge thing is that in sixth form, you're usually living with your family, whereas in university, you're living alone, and there are a huge range of responsibilities that come with living alone. So that's it for the first objective. So our next objective is knowing and developing the skills needed to thrive in university. Essentially, why we're focusing on this objective is because university, as we've mentioned, is very different from sixth form, and there are lots of changes that you're going to have to go through. But we wanted to know what parts of university actually scare you. So maybe we could talk about those challenges that you think you might face and equip you with skills to help overcome those challenges. So in the next slide, or if you could just talk about specific things about university that scare you. So we have finances, definitely. I completely agree. As someone who was actually physically in university for a very short period of time, I completely understand that. I still don't think I have the hang of managing my finances and budgeting. So that is something that takes time. Time management as well, again, because it's so much independent and self-paced work, time management can be a bit of an issue, prioritizing your work versus academics versus your social life, all of that might take a bit of practice and experience. Learning a lot of content, I definitely agree with that. I think one of the things that I was scared about, or at least told to be scared about when I was getting into medical school, was, oh my God, medical school, the concepts must be so, heavy, and they must be so complicated. How will you understand stuff? But actually, at least this is my personal experience, I haven't found understanding concepts hard. Occasionally, there might be a lecture or two that I would not have understood on the first attempt and would have to go back to later on or use another resource. But for the most part, I understand concepts fairly easily. The tricky part for me and a couple of my friends is the fact that there's just so much content. Understanding the concept is okay, but then learning all of this content, anatomy, physiology, pathology, biochemistry, there's just so much, which is what makes it hard, and that's not something that I'm used to or anyone is really used to at a high school level. Staying on the right track, definitely. Independent learning and time management between personal and uni life, we've discussed this, and these are all very valid concerns and fears. So these are just some things that I could think of that me and a couple of friends have gone through and we've spoken about. So I'm going to study concepts in more detail in university. I don't know if I will be able to cope up. How will I study, cook, clean, do laundry, and still find time to go out? Medicine is supposed to be one of the hardest courses. How will I manage? Do I even deserve to be here? So these are all valid concerns that I've heard come up. But with the right skill set, with the right support group, surrounding yourself with people who support you even in tough times definitely helps a lot. So here are just some skills that I thought were, maybe like the 6 most important skills that you needed for medical school. And let's just quickly go through that. So one is independent learning, and independent learning goes hand in hand with self-motivation. So one way that I stay self-motivated is just reminding myself why I'm in this career in the first place, especially in first year or in your preclinical years, regardless of what school you go to, you will have between 1 and 3 preclinical years, which is just you doing lectures on lectures on lectures. And it tends to feel like a bioscience degree or a medical science degree rather than a medicine course, because there's barely any practical aspects to it. And that journey might be, that journey definitely isn't as glamorous as you would hope it to be. But it's all about that self-motivation and reminding yourself that your end goal is becoming a doctor, and you will reach that goal one day, and it's all going to be worth it in the end. And it's also about enjoying the journey for you to become a doctor in the end. Learning all of these things, experiencing new things, making new friendships and relationships, all of that is fun, all of that is part of medical school. And that's some ways that I keep myself self-motivated. And self-motivation helps you stay on track with your independent learning and helps you create sort of a timetable or a to-do list that you need to follow. Another thing is also time management. So Google Calendar is something that really, really helps you with time management, or just generally making to-do lists. I use Notion to make my to-do lists, as well as a physical planner. I know Yusuf, who is the founder of the Aspiring Medics and also does these workshops with me, he uses Google Calendar very, very well. And I'm sure you've seen a whole host of other productivity videos, and each YouTuber has their own way of managing their time. Each medical student has their own way of managing their time. So I'm not going to go into too many details on how to manage your time because I'm sure you can figure that out for yourself. My top tip for that would be do not follow anything that other people are doing. So just because someone else is following a certain time management technique or note-taking technique, as is our next point, that does not mean that it will work for you. Instead, what I would recommend is try out a bunch of different time management techniques and try out a bunch of different note-taking techniques, and then decide what technique is right for you. Because just because a YouTuber is doing it, that does not mean that that will work for you as well. So really experiment, take time to experiment. Our next tip is note taking. So if you're in a lecture where the lecturer is essentially just talking continuously for an hour, doesn't really stop, that's pretty different to how sixth form classes are structured, where it is more interactive and more engaging. So how are you going to take your notes then? What method of note taking suits you, digital or paper, writing questions and answers, or just bullet points, mind maps? There's many ways to take notes. And we will be posting a study skills webinar as well, so stay tuned for that. But essentially, a tip that I learned before going into medical school was this degree is really long. It's 6 years long. And so you don't have to figure it all out in your first year or even your first 2 years. If you don't figure out your perfect method of note taking, your perfect method of time management, that's all right. So one piece of advice that I got was in your first year, just take time out to figure out your note taking method and to figure out a time management method and to just figure out a study schedule that works for you. And it's fine to take a year out just to figure your life out, because at the end of the day, this is a 6 year long degree. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So take time out in the beginning to train and figure out a schedule that works for you. And it will definitely pay off in the later years, which inevitably matter more. The next point is research. So in medical school, you might be involved in a lot of research, especially if you're doing an intercalated degree or if you have student-selected components or scholarly projects, you will be involved in research. So maybe going through some research papers and understanding the general basis of research might be useful. The next point is holding yourself accountable. Again, this comes with self-motivation and organization, time management, independent learning. It's all interlinked. So holding yourself accountable, essentially, that you need to finish your to-do list, you need to finish the work that's set out for you, that you have probably set out for yourself because your university doesn't give you a fixed timetable. So holding yourself accountable. A useful way to do this, especially, and it's become super popular in the pandemic, is getting a friend group, getting a study group, even if it's online, and holding each other accountable. That might be pretty useful. And lastly, organization. So that is to-do lists, timetables, journaling, whatever it is for you, but staying organized and staying on the top of all of your work is very important. Again, as we've said, in medical school, there's a whole host of content to cover there, and sometimes that can get overwhelming. So it's very easy to fall behind on your work. But if you stay organized, time management, and if you just focus on these 6 tips and these 6 skills, you will stay on track for medical school, and that is incredibly useful. So that's it for our first 2 objectives. We're now going to recap work experience and reflecting on it. So on the next slide, I want you guys to rate how important you think work experience is in you becoming a good medical student or a good doctor. So we know that work experience is important to mention in your personal statement and your interviews, that's for sure. But do you think it's actually useful for you to become a good doctor? Is it absolutely necessary? Do you think you can become a good doctor or a good medical student without work experience and reflecting on it? So we have an average of 4.3. Completely agree with that. I think work experience is important for becoming a good medical student, at least if not a good doctor, because in medical school you do get a lot of experience with placements. But I think work experience has helped me become a good medical student in terms of recognizing NHS values and just skills that I need to develop to be a good medical student. So this includes communication, trust, empathy. And although I knew that theoretically, I think work experience helped me see how doctors actually put those skills in practice every day during a consultation. So I think work experience has been very useful for me in my medical school journey so far. So this is just an excerpt from my personal statement, which you can find on our website, The Aspiring Medics. So it is my personal statement as well as an annotation that I've done explaining my thought process behind each paragraph, each sentence, and so on. So this was the paragraph that addressed my work experience, and I'm just quickly going to read it out. So the doctor-patient relationship I experienced taught me that empathy is non-negotiable in the medical field. The patience with which doctors reassured parents was remarkable. Looking back, I understood it was the doctor's help that made that experience with my grandparents bearable. In India, I not only witnessed patients from different socioeconomic backgrounds receive quality healthcare, but also how doctors managed to give individual attention to all patients despite the large numbers. So, key takeaways from my work experience were empathy, patience, and tailored communication, right? So, these were my key takeaways, and I've definitely put them to use in any sort of clinical skill sessions that I've had. So, again, I haven't been on placement so far because in King's we don't have placement in first year, and that only starts from second year. But this year we did have a bunch of activities where we would try to do a mock-up consultation or a mock-up conversation as a medical student with a pretend patient and just practice our communication, where I really learned a lot about tailored communication and empathy, patience, all of those skills. And because I had work experience, I knew how to implement these skills into an actual conversation and an actual consultation. So that's about work experience and reflecting on it. So you can find a whole bunch of personal statement examples on our website from students from many medical schools across the UK, and how, of course, and the key thing is that there's no golden rule for a personal statement. Everyone has their own way of reflecting and writing. This was just my example, but if you go online, you can see our personal statement examples, and those are the entire personal statements. If you go to our personal statement guide, right at the bottom, we've split up these personal statement examples into categories. So we have just the introduction, you can see that for 5 or 6 people, just their work experience paragraph, just a paragraph addressing their supercurricular activities, and so on. So it's split up, and that's something that you cannot find anywhere else on the internet. So I'd really recommend going through that resource. So write your work experience paragraph, look at how other people have reflected on it. Do you think your reflection is good enough? And so on. And now, lastly, we're going to look into a day or a week in my life as a medical student. So, more about me is that I go to King's, and this is an integrated teaching style school, which means that we have early clinical contact. However, that starts next year, so I can't really talk about that. This year, I was in my preclinical year, so that was focused mainly on just lots of lectures covering a whole range of topics and disciplines, and I will be talking more about that. Again, I just completed my first year and I'm going into my second year in September. So if you can see my screen, this is what a typical week in my life looked like. So I would put my entire life, all the lectures that I had to do, onto my Google Calendar because we were online this year because of the pandemic and I was also at home. I would put all of the live classes in purple, knowing that this is something non-negotiable. I have to join the class at this time. I can't be flexible with this. And in peach, I put all of my pre-recorded lectures that I could essentially do at any time. So the way how I stayed organized and stayed at the top of my work was, even if there was a pre-recorded lecture that I could essentially do at any time, I would try to finish the work that they assigned for that week within that week. So essentially what I did was, maybe I was too busy on Monday, I had plans to go out, I would just move this lecture onto Tuesday and do more work then. You can see Wednesday is pretty free. I can move my lectures there, and that's how I organized my life. And I also want to show up just how varied weeks in medical school look like. So this is the week right after that in February. So you can see this is the very next week. We have lots of lectures, lots of pre-recorded lectures, and some live classes as well. This was pretty intense. And then the week after that, we barely had any classes. So that's the thing with medical school. It's just very unpredictable, and every week is different. You will have a very intense week followed by nothing at all. That's just what I mean by there's no fixed timetable. And it's very flexible, and there's no structure or organization to the timetable. You just have to figure that one out on your own. So that was a bit about my general timetable and just academics, but that's not it about that's not it about medical school or being a medical student. There's also your social life, which I believe I could manage and balance along with my academics. There's also work, and I was working with the Aspiring Medics, of course. And I could balance all of that because I really used my Google Calendar and journaling and timetabling and to-do lists pretty religiously. So all of that helped me. And also engaging in societies in a medical school, because again, I was a first year student, so I did not know anyone at the university, and societies are a great way to meet new people. So I was part of two societies, helped plan a conference, attended conferences of other societies that I wasn't a part of. And this includes medical and non-medical societies. I'm really interested in dance, also my culture. All of that is really important to me, and I could engage in all of that. And I'm hoping the next year, with more in-person events, I will be able to engage with societies even more. And just a last takeaway point is that do not make medicine your entire life. There is more to life than medicine. There is your social life, work, um, interacting with people. All of that is very, very important as well. And if you ignore those aspects of your life, it is very easy for you to burn out and start becoming unproductive. So keep that in mind while you plan your week. Don't just always study, 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 but also engage in other parts of your life. Do not let go of hobbies or interests just because of medicine, because medicine, again, isn't everything. So that would be my last takeaway. And another thing is to keep an eye out for our Day in the Life of a Medical Student series coming later this summer. So we're going to feature medical students from across the country, and you're going to get realistic insights of their life and what they do in medical school in under 60 seconds. So you will be able to compare study and time management techniques and just have a better idea of what medical school is all about later this summer. So that's it for all of our objectives today. We're now just quickly going to move into a feedback session, and I just want to know how confident you guys are with regards to insight into medical school now after today's session. So we have an average of 4.8, which is absolutely amazing. Definitely an improvement from the beginning of the session, and definitely keep going through this stuff just before you get into medical school. Try to develop these skills the summer before medical school, and you will thrive there as well. And if you could rate today's session, that's a 4.8. Thank you so much for that generous feedback. And I think we can now move into our audience Q&A session. So I'm doing an EPQ on COVID-19, and I'm going into year 12 next year. Will it become dated by the time I apply next year, or will it still be relevant? So the examiners will understand that you wrote your EPQ earlier, a year before, so they will completely understand that COVID-19 was topical then. But more importantly, your EPQ just should be in something that you're passionate about. So personally, I didn't do an EPQ because I didn't do A levels, but I did do the IB, which is a different curriculum, and I was required to do a research paper in that. Now, my research was on plants, nothing to do with the human body or human physiology or anything like that. But it was something that I was genuinely interested in. And essentially, what doing an EPQ or an extended essay shows admissions counselors is that you're passionate about something and you understand what research is. And if you're passionate about something, you can see it through till the end, and you've done some proper research at the age of 16, 17, 18, which is absolutely remarkable. So if you're passionate about something in COVID-19 and you want to do an EPQ on it, go right ahead. It does not need to be topical at the time of your application. Do you prefer handwritten or typed notes? So I kind of like a mix. Usually what I do is I have an iPad, so I will handwrite my notes on my iPad, but it is digital because I really prefer having all of my notes in one place on my iPad or my laptop rather than having 4 or 5 different books. So I really prefer the digital medium in that aspect. Sometimes if I'm really lazy and don't want to write, I will type out my notes as well. Do you know of any research or academic projects that we could do over summer? So I'm not aware of those right now, but something that you could very easily do is just email universities that you live close to, or email universities that you want to apply to and ask them if they have any openings. In all honesty, you might not get a reply, and that's completely fine, but email professors. Tell them, hey, I'm interested in the research that you're doing. I was wondering if you have any positions open for high school students. And if you email, say, like 10 or 15 of them, maybe one of them will reply. And that's always a good thing. You could also just Google research projects dash university high school students, or medicine research projects for high school students or for sixth form students, and that should help you. Arisma, if you don't mind, how do you balance between using Google Calendar and Notion for organizing your life? So on Google Calendar, I essentially have all of my school commitments or meetings that I have to attend, so lectures that I have to watch, live classes that I have, as well as meetings. And then apart from that, I also have a bunch of things to do, like revise this topic or do this work. And I can't plan my life down to the minute. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, or I'm just not comfortable with planning my life down to the minute. So I don't enjoy putting my to-do lists on Google Calendar because sometimes my plans will change and I will just do the thing later, and I don't like to allot a time to it. So on Notion, I make daily to-do lists and I just decide what I have to do for that day, in addition to the lectures that I have to watch and the meetings that I have to attend on Google Calendar. It's a bit of a complicated system and it might not work for everyone, but it works for me. And again, that's the key takeaway from the session. Just practice techniques that work for you. Would love a tutorial for both Google Calendar and Notion. So that's great. Definitely be on the lookout for it. We will put it up as a YouTube video very soon. What is imposter syndrome? I've heard about it, but I'm not sure if what I'm thinking is the same as what you're talking about. So imposter syndrome is essentially that feeling that you don't belong somewhere, or that essentially that you're an imposter there, or that you don't deserve to be there. So this happens a lot with medical students where they don't think that they deserve to be in medical school. They're not good enough, they're not smart enough, they're not worthy enough. And that's just imposter syndrome. That's not true. Keep in mind that when you get into medical school, you've gone through a rigorous testing process. You have gotten good grades. You have completed your UCAT or BMAT exam, which again, incredibly tough. Met the university's, cutoff score if they had one. Gone through an interview process where you probably did a lot of stations. So you went through a bunch of different stations and answered each of their questions. And after all of that, they accepted you into medical school. You've gone through that rigorous process and you've passed every step of the way. So you definitely deserve to be here in this university studying medicine. And just keep that in mind if you ever feel imposter syndrome in university, which is pretty common, I must say. Even though I am being all preachy with this, I've definitely felt the same thing before. And another thing, I think professors at medical school are so sweet about this as well, because they completely understand that imposter syndrome is common. And something that the head of my year said at this meeting that we had was that we've put you through all of these hurdles when applying to medicine. And after all of that, we've accepted you. We're making an investment in you. And more than you wanting to pass, we want you to pass because we've invested our time interviewing you, going through your application, reading your personal statements, looking at your UCAT results. We've put in that time and energy, and we loved you the most, and we got you into our medical school. We're making an investment in you, and we will do everything in our power to help you pass and to help you thrive in medical school. So there's a lot of support in medical school. Of course, your friends and your peers, but also the professors, they're really, really rooting for you. And I think that was great and really helped me with this whole imposter syndrome thing. And I felt much more supported despite living at home a million miles away from my actual university. And I think that was really sweet. And I think that's a great way to end today's session. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I hope that you've taken something away from today's session, and we'll see you next week.